Okay. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar today. We've been doing this series for quite some time now, and I'm really excited to bring some new topics and new things to the fore. By way of introduction, I just wanted to share a little bit about who I am and what I do. So I've been in the development world for coming up now on actually over 15 years. And I've had 20 years of experience in the not-for-profit world in general, including admissions experience in a college. So I've been around. I've seen quite a number of things. I've also worked for different types of organizations, including schools, healthcare organizations, etc., which have really given me a very, very broad understanding of how the not-for-profit world works in different segments of that not-for-profit world. I've also spent almost a decade in corporate America. And many of the tools that I learned in the for-profit world, I really bring to the not-for-profit world as well on behalf of my clients. And many of the concepts that are part of the for-profit world translate very, very well into the not-for-profit world as well. And I really use those tools to help organizations view themselves differently, number one. Number two, view themselves more professionally and more like a business. Because the reality is the only difference that I typically believe that is between the not-for-profit world versus the for-profit world is that word not. We're businesses, we're running a business, we've got to run them like a business. And so many organizations that don't think that way, I unfortunately see, typically don't do particularly well. I started RH Strategic in 2016, really as a side gig. It was, organizations were approaching me about helping them with their fundraising, and when I was able to, I helped them. But last number of years, I really turned it into a full-scale consulting firm, working with not-for-profit leaders across the United States and even internationally as well. I have a number of international clients, which I'm really excited about as well. And part of my goal with all my clients is first and foremost to quiet the chaos that surrounds the not-for-profit world. That's number one, as Michael is clearly laughing at, which we'll come to in a couple of minutes. The second thing is to really define very, very clear development strategies, which I think is absolutely crucial, and it's got to be strategic. And then the final piece is making sure that those development strategies are sustainable and bring in sustained revenue over the long term. It's not about one campaign, it's not about one event, it's about using those tools to broaden the horizons for that organization for many, many years into the future. So obviously, as you know, the webinar is being recorded. And when I send out the recording, hopefully a little bit later today, I really want to invite you to share it with your colleagues at your organization, other organizations. And of course, I encourage you to reach out to me directly if I can help you or your organization. So when I advertised this particular webinar, I obviously decided to do it a little bit differently. I wanted people to have the anonymity of being able to ask questions openly. And I think a lot of people are taking me up on that because some of the people that could not be on the call today or decided not to be on the call felt that some of the questions they wanted to ask, which they emailed me and sent me in advance, were not questions they wanted to discuss publicly and be seen publicly about, and they've actually opted to see the recording later, and hopefully we'll answer the questions for them effectively. So one of the questions that came in was, why are so many not-for-profits run by people who do not understand development? And I was thinking about this question because I think it's a really fascinating question, and I would argue that most people who start not-for-profits, for sure, when they're starting, there's this immense passion that they have for what they're aiming to do, for what their goals are for that organization. And that passion very often does not translate into any ability to run a business or any ability to run a not-for-profit business. As we mentioned before, the difference between not-for-profits and for-profit is that word not. And while they are able to very often build very, very, they're tremendous things, really great things, their expertise really lies in building programs and not building a development vision for their organization. They often get very, very excited that we're working for this organization, everything's amazing, and the money's just going to roll in. Why would you not want to support this organization. And that's a real challenge. It really is, because they're not necessarily looking at the bigger picture. And I'm not saying for one second that development is the only thing that's involved in an organization. It's one piece of how an organization is effective and works well. But so many of these organizations, so many of these organizational leaders are not necessarily focused on what needs to be done, because again, there's that excitement, which I think is really, which is really interesting. Do I have a solution? No, I don't. I really wish I did. The reality is, it's people who are excited and passionate about creating something that, and working in an organization that's doing amazing things doesn't necessarily translate into anything else. I also want to tell I guess it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke. There's another reason why I believe that there's so few not-for-profit professionals who just are not great at development, and that is to keep people like me in business. So I think that's part of it. That's part of it as well. Does that, Michael? I think you asked this question. Does that respond to your question in a way? Again, it's a really tough one.
Yeah, I agree that a lot of people start with a great idea but they don't think it through.
Right.
And then they appoint themselves CEO, or you go to established organizations with people who were on boards with certain backgrounds, but they're not fundraising backgrounds. There may be legal, they may be accounting, and those are great for running the business. That doesn't necessarily make them great fundraisers.
Right.
So
correct.
Yeah. And so I'm vexed where this is not the first time, but that I've run into a situation where I work for an organization run by somebody who's a great administrator, a great lawyer, a great accountant, but a terrible fundraiser.
Right.
And then they look to me and say, well, you're the problem. And I'm like, I'm the problem. Okay. I'm the one who's trained in fundraising. You hired me, but I'm the problem. So, unaware that the leader of the organization needs to be a part of the fundraising, and they don't want to do it.
Right. That's actually a major problem with a lot of organizations, and especially boards, by the way. Boards have this view that they're there to advise only. Boards are not there for advice only. The philosophy behind boards is that it takes the three W's: wealth, wisdom, and work. You're not going to find, in general, somebody's going to fit all three of those characteristics, but they're important. They're crucially important. If you don't have the wealth coming in, you're not going to get anywhere. You don't have the wisdom, that experience of business leaders who've been around the block a couple of times. You're not going to get anywhere either in general. And if you don't have volunteers who are willing to literally roll up their sleeves, again, you're not going to find necessarily all three characteristics in any one individual. You may find someone who brings wealth and wisdom, somebody who brings work and wisdom, somebody who brings wealth and work. There are those types, that right. exist out there.
That would be a great board.
It would be a phenomenal board, but unfortunately, so many of them are just not set up that way, and it's to the detriment, unfortunately, of the organization. It really is. But we're gonna talk a little bit more about some of the other points that you brought up as I go through some of the questions. So one of the other questions that came in, really a wonderful question. I'm just going to read it here. It says, how does one balance volunteers who want to help and bring dozens of ideas, where some ideas are valuable, but some may be counterproductive? How do we harness their terrific energy while achieving our intended goals? So I'm not sure about you guys, but in my experience in the development world, when I was working as a professional, volunteers were sometimes the bane of my existence, and volunteers at other times were so incredibly valuable to moving the mission forward. But you sometimes couldn't tell. I still remember I was sitting in a meeting once. I was looking to create a brand new campaign, and I brought in 3 volunteers who I believed this whole cause would resonate with. 2 of them were sitting in this meeting. They said, "We love this concept. Absolutely. This is amazing. We loved it." And then there was the 3rd who said, "I'm not so sure." But the way she said it and a couple of her comments actually caused the other 2 volunteers to start completely rethinking. They looked at it from a negative perspective as opposed to a growth perspective and a growth point of view. And everything went downhill from there. So volunteers are something that I view them very much as a double-edged sword. They bring passion, they bring energy, which is wonderful, but they don't always see the big picture of an organization. And that's something where the administration, the leadership of the organization is really, really key in making sure that volunteers understand that while their ideas are wonderful, we would love to implement every single one of them. As an organization, we simply do not have the ability to do that. And I think it's a very delicate balance that must be created where we have to very gently, but firmly, it's got to be firm as well, ensure that the volunteers understand the organization's mission and vision. And sometimes we have to make it very, very clear, obviously very respectfully. We never ever want to disrespect a volunteer who typically is a donor. But why an idea may sound wonderful on paper, but may not be executable in reality, or could it potentially even be counterproductive to the long-term goals of an organization. So you kind of need to be firm and help that volunteer understand while their idea is wonderful, it doesn't necessarily work in the situation. One of the things I also think is really important when it comes to these types of interactions is acknowledging the donor's contributions, but suggesting privately, you speak to them privately about helping them and really helping them understand the reasons why an idea cannot be implemented. Again, when you do it in public, it becomes a lot more challenging. But if you're speaking to them one-on-one, sit down over a cup of coffee and say, we love your idea. Here are the reasons why we have difficulty right now making this happen. And what I would often say to volunteers is, coming back to that point, is your idea may not work today, but let's keep it on the radar. Maybe we should revisit it in 6 months. Maybe we should revisit it in a year, so that you're keeping them engaged. You're not discounting them at all, and you shouldn't be discounting their advice, their counsel. Their idea may be a brilliant idea, but today is not the day to do it. And I think that's something really, really important in maintaining those relationships with those volunteers. Bring them in, show them behind the curtain, let them see what really goes on behind the scenes in an organization. And by the way, Michael, to your point, those are the types of volunteers, when you bring them in and you help them understand why an organization does what it does or doesn't do what it doesn't do. It helps them get a far better picture, so that maybe one day when they create their own not-for-profit, or perhaps one day when they work at a not-for-profit, they'll have a deeper understanding of exactly why this is necessary. And sometimes saying no is really crucially important. Do you guys have any questions on that? I mean, that's just some of my thoughts on volunteering. I know that the person who asked the question isn't on the call because he asked for the recording later. But any thoughts or comments of your own? Okay.
So when it comes to volunteers, I think it's important to assess the strengths of all volunteers that are on your board, and look for the weaknesses, and try to fill your board seats with people that will take care of the weaknesses. So you want a diverse board, obviously, but you also want a group of people that not only share all in the passion and vision, but are also willing to do the work, just alluding to the earlier question, but then also to bring a different skill set and a perspective that will be well-rounded for the organization.
Right, indeed. Okay, so let's move on to the next question that I got, and that is, I never know when is the right time to make an ask. After having met someone first time, second time, or third time, what do I do? And that's a great question. Frankly, it's a really, really tough question. And I got to be honest, there's no simple answer to it. There isn't. And I know what I'm about to say is not going to be satisfactory. I'm very much aware of that. But what I'm about to say is the most important feature, I believe, in deciding when is the right time to do an ask is trusting your gut. It's trusting your gut. And unfortunately, there is literally, in my view, no general way around it. Some donors will give you a signal. You're sitting down with them, you're talking to them. They'll give you a signal, either tell me more, or I'm interested in getting involved. Okay, that's a signal. They're telling you, ask me for a gift. Some won't. Some will sit there and they'll nod and they'll listen respectfully, but they're not going to give you any signals. So that makes it a very, very real challenge. Sometimes, and I've been in this situation multiple times, where you're meeting with a donor, you're trying to figure out, you've met with them once, you've met with them twice, you've spoken to them on the phone, you've connected with them, you've started creating a relationship with them over time. Sometimes you just have to go in for the plunge, because you literally don't know. That's again just one of the realities of the world that we're in. That's part of the chaos that I sometimes talk about, that surrounds the not-for-profit world. In our microcosm of the development world, sometimes we just don't know. We've just got to trust our gut and say, ready to do. We've got to go for it. I'll tell you this much. I was in a solicitation. I set up a meeting. This was when I lived in Los Angeles. The head of the organization was coming into town. We set up a meeting with a donor, and we were meeting with the donor. It started off as a great conversation, and we were trying to figure out. And I was sitting there like, when are we going to do an ask, and should we do an ask? And the head of the organization went in and said, we're doing the ask, and he did it. We ended up getting a gift, but it was just a very, very strange situation. And I spoke with him afterwards, and I said, how did you know the timing was right? And he said, honestly, I had no clue. This is a guy, by the way, with 40 plus years of development experience. He's built an organization that is, first of all, profoundly impactful, but also raises $25 to $30 million a year. This guy knew his stuff. He really knew it. And he said to me, I just didn't know. I had to go in for the plunge, and it worked. It worked. We were able to send kids to the special medical camp that this organization has. And I don't want to mention the name of the organization, but you can probably figure it out. But that was how we went into that situation. At the same time, I also want to say we have to work very, very hard not to push off making an ask. And I find very often people often do this because they don't necessarily have the confidence, or they somehow manage to talk themselves out of doing an ask. They'll say, no, the donor's not really ready. This isn't going to resonate with the donor. They'll somehow find an excuse not to do it. And I think that that's a very, very natural thing, unfortunately, that people do, because there's that unknown. You're walking into really very much an unknown situation. And honestly, we also got to realize that we take that plunge, we may get rejected, we may get a no, and we have to be able to pivot when that does happen. And the way I suggest pivoting is ask the donor for their reasoning. Why do you not want to? Okay, what are the reasons for that? You're not trying to change their mind. You should not, absolutely not try and change their mind. It's there about listening. It's there about learning how you as a professional can grow, and how you as a professional can look at a situation and say, this is what I need to look for with a donor in order to say, yes, now is the time. Now I've got to go in and ready for an ask. Use it as a learning opportunity. And one of the things I always say with a donor is, when a donor says no, is I ask them if they're open to revisiting in 6 months or in a year. Sometimes the reason they don't want to give is personal, sometimes it's financial, it can be multiple different reasons, as we all know from asking people for gifts. But if we put a timetable on and say, can I reach out to you in 6 months or in a year? You're keeping that door open, which is so crucial. And I find, sometimes development professionals will not do that. They'll literally, the donor says no, that's it, the door is shut, I can't go back. Don't do that. Don't do that to yourselves. You owe it to your organization to say, let's keep this door open. Now, again, some donors may say, look, this is not an area that I'm interested in. The answer is no. Okay, move on with your life. There's nothing you can do. Most donors are not going to say that. Most donors, the reason that they're not giving is really very legitimate to them. It makes sense. And they want to come back. They want you to come back in a way in 6 months, in a year, 2 years, whatever it may be. But keep them on their radar. Don't lose them. That's something I would definitely recommend as far as that's concerned. Any follow-up questions from you guys as far as that particular question? Yeah, Michael.
So my opinion is, if you do identification and cultivation properly, the ask naturally occurs. And it might happen in a couple of meetings. It might happen in a year's worth of meetings. You were right. Your gut tells you when it's right, and the dynamic between you and the donor is excellent, and the conversation's going back and forth. And you've already hinted that you're looking for support for this organization that they already support, and maybe you're looking to increase that. And once that conversation is going in that right direction, sure, don't just make that ask. Would you support it by 20% more? Would you support it by doubling your gift? And chances are, if there was a good rapport and a good relationship between you and the donor, then yes, you'll likely get what you're looking for.
Right. Absolutely.
That's been my experience.
Absolutely, yes. One of the things I'll also add, there are times where you'll go into an ask. You may have your moves management system, which we'll talk about in a subsequent question. Your moves management system may tell you now's the time to do an ask. You run through all the moves. You know exactly when this donor's primed for it, and you're sitting in that meeting. Your gut may tell you something's off. The donor's not ready yet, and you've got to trust that gut. On the flip side, your moves management may say, "I'm getting together for coffee next month or this month with this particular donor. We're not doing an ask. We're just updating them on what's going on in the organization." And that donor may be sitting opposite you and say, I really want to do something big. You've got to be able to pivot on the spot and go in for an ask immediately, because your donor's giving you that signal. Right. You don't want to say, no, we don't want to talk about it. It's on my moves management system for you for next month. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. It's a bird in the hand type of situation.
If you have
trusting your gut.
If you have a good conversation with your donors and you ask the right questions as to what's going on in their life, what's happening, where are they in their life? Are they selling a business? Are they retiring? Or did something happen? They have new grandchildren. That gives you an idea of where their head is at and where their financial status is. And then that'll be your cue to make an ask, not make an ask, and I have been bold enough to ask for a timeline. You want to support organization, we're looking for that support. When's the right time for you? And several people have told me very bluntly, this is a great time. 6 months from now is a better time.
There you go. Absolutely.
And then you just put it on your calendar, and then you follow up and go out and see them.
Precisely. There's another question actually that's coming up in a little bit about authenticity. And I think it kind of feeds and responds to your question in a way, or you're giving an answer to an extent to that question that's coming up, because that authenticity is something that really is an issue for a lot of fundraisers. It really is. Yep. Any other questions? Okay, so let's move on. Let's move on to the next question that I got. Which again, another phenomenal question. This is I really had to give some thought to this one in particular. How do you transition donors from one director's development to another?
Oh, good one.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Really great question. There's an old joke that amongst development directors, that most development directors will last in a position typically for 2 years. The first year, they're spending all their time fixing up the mess from the previous development director, and their second year is spent looking for their next position. It's a joke, but the funny thing is, every joke has a little element of truth to it. And I think in our world in particular, it really does. So what I want to do is I really want to explore for a minute why directors of development do leave. And why we don't, if we understand why they leave, it hopefully will give us an insight into how to prevent them from leaving. And by preventing them from leaving, we don't have to go through these transitions every 12, 18, 24 months. So one of the things with me, I've actually left a number of director of development positions for a variety of reasons over the course of my career. But what's interesting is that it's very, very rarely have to do with money. Very, very rarely. The reasons that I've typically left positions were primarily because I wasn't given the ability to innovate, and to use my creativity to move the organization forward. And personally, I've never found anything more frustrating than when my hands were tied behind my back and simply was not given the ability to make things happen. When an organization says, this is the way it's going to be, this is the way you have to do it, it ties your hands, it frustrates development directors tremendously, because the reality is most of us are very, very creative people. We love people, we love being with people, talking to people, coming up with new ideas, new concepts, new campaigns, new ways of raising money, new ways of taking an organization to a whole new level. What I will say is this, and one of my most incredible experiences working for any organization was when I was working for a high school in Los Angeles. 2 weeks in, I had my first board meeting, and I was expected to be, and by the way, it's the right thing to do for your development director to be at every single board meeting. But I was told I was expected to be at every board meeting, which was music to my ears. So it was 2 weeks in, was my first board meeting. The president asked me to present my vision for development for the school, which I did. And then he turned to me in front of the entire board and said the following. He said, if you have an idea that you think will make money for us, go for it. Go for it. We're very much aware not every single idea will work. We're very much aware that not every single campaign will be successful, but we want you to try. And that's exactly what I did. My very, very first campaign that I did with them was a major dinner. I made a couple of tweaks, and we were able to increase revenue by 34% in year one. Year two, we increased revenue by around 25%, building on that model. Why was I able to do that? Because the president and the board had given me that flexibility. They had literally untied my hands and said, run with it, make it happen. And that's exactly what I did. And I really believe that organizational leaders absolutely must make sure that their development directors are challenged and allowed a degree of flexibility to do things their way. It may not be the way that the leader of the organization wants, whether the executive director, CEO, or what have you. But some directors of development will need a lot more guidance than others, for sure. But they need a leadership standing behind them, very, very firmly behind them, giving them the tools and resources that they need to really do their jobs exceptionally well. And I think that's absolutely essential. When organizations allow the fundraisers not to run free, for sure, you can't just do anything, but when they give them that flexibility, they soar. They really do. By the way, just a PS, the same school that I worked at, about 6 or 7 months in, I was working on a campaign that typically brought in most years around $15,000 to $25,000. Not a major campaign for the school at all. The first year that I took over the campaign, I did something phenomenally creative, hadn't been done before in certainly with the school, but actually within the community as well, to a large extent. The $25,000 that year was $500,000. Profoundly successful campaign. Profoundly successful. It's one of those things I literally feel such immense pride today, and it set the school on a trajectory that superpowered their culture of philanthropy. To this day, I believe that because of that campaign, the school is becoming more and more successful every single year at every single campaign they do, because of what we built several years ago. So talking about the transition. So what I find is, for most donors, certainly the smaller donors, I think a simple email thanking the previous director of development, hopefully they left on good terms, you say thank you, and then welcoming the new director of development is more than adequate. For major donors, I think it's a little bit of a different situation. And what I'd suggest is really having a meeting, or if necessary, a phone call, whatever works best, with the executive director or other senior staff members, or frankly, even better, having the board president or another board member meeting with those donors together with the director of development. Bring them along. Make that introduction where you're saying, this is our new guy. We want to introduce you to him because we want to continue the relationship, not necessarily with the original or the previous director of development, but with our new director of development. that handoff when it comes at a senior level, and not where the director of development has to now scramble, calling hundreds of people and say, I'm the new guy, or I'm the new person, please take my call. Involve the leadership to help get you across that finish line and really make that transition as smooth as possible. And I really believe that when an organizational leader makes that type of efforts, the transition for the director of development is, and significantly, by the way, for the donor, is seamless, is absolutely seamless. I don't believe necessarily that directors of development are really tied into, okay, so it's this is the director of development, this is my person. It's not always the case. They are connected to the organization. You want to maintain that connection, of course, and the way to do that is to really do as much as possible to bring your new director of development on in a way that shows that the organization firmly stands behind them and supports them. Development is about relationships, as all of us on this call know. And the goal is to really pave the way for your new director of development. The effort, by the way, I really believe will pay off. You'll have a happier director of development, and you'll have a director of development who is frankly less likely to leave in 12 or 24 months. Any questions on that? Any comments? Any insights? This is an open conversation. Okay, so let's move on to.
I'd love to ask a question.
Sure, Shai, go ahead.
You say that we should set our to make sure that the development director has the tools, and they should be set them up for success. Maybe you could give us a few details of what you would envision as setting them up for success, meaning asking for Uganda's budget so that they can put advertisements and PR marketing in every newspaper in town. Meaning, obviously, most organizations don't have that. So when you say set them up for success, does it just mean allowing them to do their innovation?
So that's a very, very good question. Look, you've always got to maintain the organization's mission in mind always. Obviously, every organization works on a budget. There's no question. I'm not suggesting for 1 second that throwing your support behind a director of development means here's a blank check, do whatever you want. No, the director of development will understand what's involved in the organization because, again, they've gone through an interview process. They're obviously learning as they go along as well because you're not going to learn everything through the interview process. But I'll tell you something very, very simple, or something phenomenally crazy, in fact. How many organizations do you move to where day one, they don't have a desk for you? They don't have an office for you. You don't have a computer. They haven't set up your email. They've done nothing. Nothing. All that stuff can be done before you arrive. When an organization doesn't do stuff like that, they're showing you that, okay, well, we're bringing you in and we'll deal with it when we can. That's not showing support. That's not showing support. Now, again, the public doesn't see that. The donors don't see that. The director of development does. And that's a basic start. Start with something very, very simple, as simple as that. But when I'm talking about, the throwing your support behind a director of development, it really means bringing them on board and in a way that does show your donors that this is a guy that he's going to do it, or she is going to do amazing things for our organization. This is why we trust him or her. This is why we want you to feel comfortable, because we feel comfortable as the CEO, as the executive director, as the board president, as a board member. Again, that's why I reiterate that having a board member do it is a lot stronger than a quote unquote paid professional. Board members are volunteer. When they're saying, this is the person that we're so thrilled to have this new director of development on board. Please give them your support as a donor. It translates into a strong relationship between that donor, that development director, and of course, most significantly, the organization. Okay, so let's move on to another question. How do you get over the feeling of inauthenticity when cultivating relationships with prospective donors? Another phenomenal question, because the reality is that a lot of the time, many of us, we're building relationships, but they're not the type of relationship where we're becoming friends per se, at least at the get-go. And because of that, because it's a relationship that seems at first to be more transactional, it's not always easy. It can be very, very difficult. Many years ago, I used to work in an admissions office at a major university, and I did hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews of students, of potential students. And there were very often some very, very nervous kids that I would interview. And one of the things that one of the tools that I would use to try and get them to relax a little bit is I would ask them how many interviews they've done in their lives. 9 times out of 10, they would say either, well, this is my first, or I've had, well, 2 other college interviews, so this, I guess, is my third. And I say to them, I would argue that you've done hundreds of interviews over the course of your life. Because every time you meet someone new, whether you're sitting at a baseball game and you turn to the person next to you, or you're in a supermarket and you meet someone online at the cashier, I'm very much guilty of this. I talk to everyone. Okay, no one is immune from a conversation with me on the line at the cashier. Okay, but it's fun and I enjoy that, because although that's not a relationship that's going to go anywhere per se, I'm exercising that relationship building muscle that's necessary. So the question, I think, is when does the relationship start? That's one of the key points, because one of the things we have to acknowledge, our donors are not stupid. They're very much on the ball. These guys, donors know, especially the major donors, they're smart people. They got where they got typically for a reason. Unless of course they're a trust fund baby, but many are not. They're self-made people, and they know exactly why you're connecting with them. They're not stupid. So embrace that. If they know why you're meeting with them, okay, use it to your advantage. You're starting off at a point where most relationships begin anyway, and they grow from there. It's meeting somebody at a baseball game, meeting somebody at a networking event, or any type of other situation where you're connecting with someone. You have to start somewhere. And anytime you're meeting with someone new, there is a level of discomfort. There really is. And part of the goal is to really take that to the next level over time. One of the things I also was thinking about when I read the question was that I'm wondering if that inauthenticity is actually part of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is where we don't feel we're qualified. We don't feel that, despite the fact that we have 15, 20 years of experience, we don't feel we're really experienced enough to be able to interact with this particular donor. I'll tell you this much: it's a syndrome that plagues me every once in a while. When I talk to, obviously now in this realm, I'm not necessarily talking to donors as much, but when I talk to clients, there are times where clients will bring me challenges and like, I have no clue what this is about. I'm not qualified to answer this question. But then I start thinking and realize I am. I do know the answers. I may not have the exact experience to answer a question or to solve a conundrum, but the accumulation of all my experiences over time have given me that ability to really come up with solutions for my clients and for donors. And I think that imposter syndrome makes us feel uncomfortable developing relationships because those relationships are based on money. And we just feel that there's this just, who am I to be doing this or asking this donor for a gift? So it does feel inauthentic. I get that. It's not necessarily easy. But I will say that just like with imposter syndrome, we have to practice our craft, to make that imposter syndrome dissipate. The more we speak to donors, the more we speak to people and ask them, and even if we feel uncomfortable, we have to push forward constantly. We sometimes have to swallow those feelings of inauthenticity. We have to say to ourselves, I can't allow this to impact the way what I'm doing, the way I know I need to do my job. And I really believe that over time, that inauthenticity will dissipate, because you really will become, you're aiming to build a very genuine, real relationship with your donor. And if you maintain that attitude of, I feel uncomfortable today, but I'm aiming to build, to connect, to establish a very real relationship that's not going to be only about money. It's going to be about picking up the phone and calling them for a birthday, for an anniversary. Unfortunately, when someone passes away, or whatever it may be, we're interacting with them now on a far more personal way, on a far more personal level. And the more we do that imposter syndrome, that inauthenticity, I believe will start melting away, and will become a very, very real and genuine relationship with that donor. Any comments, any questions? This is about learning together.
I think to be authentic, you have to work for places that you feel passionate about.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
going, let's say I wanted to work for New York University. I have never been to NYU. I know very little about it. To get hired on and be a fundraiser for them without having ever attended there or known anybody who goes there, you go and you call on alumni and they're like, well, they want to talk to you about your experience at NYU and you don't have one. That means that that's not a great organization that I would want to go work for. I would probably advise people, choose things that you're passionate about, that you could be passionate with other people about. And if it's a university or if it's a medical cause and it's touched you or touched a family member of yours, you can identify with those donors then far better. And then you don't have to worry about being inauthentic, because you lived it. Like I have a relative who's a diabetic working for a diabetic organization. Hey, that resonates. Yeah. If I wanted to go deal with someone with cancer, then, I wouldn't be able to necessarily relate, because thank goodness I don't know anybody who's died from cancer.
Right. Again, you've made a phenomenal point. It's many years ago. I was actually out for dinner with a friend of mine. His name's Dave Lynn. He's actually been on my webinar. His moniker, or he's also known as the Gratitude Dude. Really very interesting guy. And one of the things that we were talking about over dinner, he said, what do you think is the most important aspect of being a development professional? And it's exactly what you said. It's passion, I believe.
Right. Genuine. Right.
When you feel that this is an organization that's part of you, that without you, the organization will not be able to be successful. Without you, or with you, this organization can take wings and just make an even greater impact. When you're a part of it in such a passionate way,
right.
You're absolutely correct that inauthenticity can absolutely melt away, because it's not about you're developing a connection for something that you so strongly believe in that it's incredible what results.
And donors sense that too. They pick up on it. They feed off of it. You feed it off of them. And that's how you get a successful relationship and eventually, and a stewardship afterwards.
Agreed completely. I'll tell you this much. When I worked for an organization a number of years ago that was a very, very highly respected cancer organization. My goal consistently with every single donor was to get them to cry. And and by the way, every time that I was able to get them to cry, they took out their checkbook.
Yeah.
And the only reason I was able to get them to do that was because of the passion that I had for the work that I was doing. When there were kids that came into our office that were bald, or kids in the hospital where we arranged for, magicians to go and do magic for them. Okay.
Right.
That was just so powerful for me personally. And it just translated immediately into that passion that I gave to the donors. And they loved it. They came back saying to me so often, like, wow, this is just incredibly, we love what you're doing because we feel your passion for what you're doing. So really something tremendous.
Yes. I'm going to have to excuse myself. I have actually an interview in a couple of minutes.
Well, good luck, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, you're welcome. I look forward to seeing you all again.
So, any other questions on that particular topic? Okay. So I do have a couple more questions that people sent in, but I want to be
Yeah.
respectful
Can
of
I
everyone's time.
just
Shia, yes, go ahead.
I think that the question of inauthenticity it can also be looked at from a different angle, meaning the question, not in terms, you're the professional, I'm coming to
We're
listen to
all
you,
learning together.
but I think the question of inauthenticity is from, I'm developing a friendship, I'm trying to develop a relationship, but ultimately we know why I'm trying to develop that relationship,
Right.
right? And I think that's where I don't think it's inauthentic. I could be very passionate about my cause, which it's obvious that, of course, like we spoke about earlier, you need to be passionate about your cause. When it comes to me developing a relationship with someone, and they know, and I'm one of a million people, both there are business people trying to develop relationships with this guy, and there's nonprofits trying to develop relationships with the guy, and I'm one of those people. So everyone knows that there's a certain same thing. It's really the same question in the business world when you're trying to develop
Right.
a relationship with someone, but ultimately you know that it's about getting business from
Business.
them.
Yeah.
So then how do you deal with that part of it?
You're asking a phenomenal question. You're asking a phenomenal question. You're asking something that I have to think about. I can't answer it here. I don't know the answer.
Right.
I just don't know. Can I get back to you on that one? Because
Of course.
honestly I've got to give it some thought. I do not know.
Of course. But when I heard that question, I thought that was going to be, I think that was the intent of the person asking the question. How do you deal with inauthenticity in fundraising? It's not inauthentic about the cause, it's inauthentic about
The relationship.
the relationship.
Right.
Now, obviously there's certain people that you connect to naturally, but then there's other people that it's very clear. I did my work, I researched. There's a guy living in Dallas who has his charitable tendencies and da da da. And now I call him and I say, can we go out for coffee? Oh, how's your children? Oh, this, that. Okay, but they know that you know there's a reason why I'm trying to develop that relationship.
Correct.
It's more than just. Now, on the other hand, it's to a certain degree, it's true in every relationship, even with my wife, even with everyone. So I guess it just requires some just thinking it through about how to walk the fine line between it being considered inauthentic versus there's nothing wrong with having a relationship where you look to gain from that relationship, but you also look to give back into the
Right.
relationship.
Right.
And then it's authentic. Same thing with your wife, right? She makes you dinner every night, and she does give you things in the relationship, but you also give her, and there's a synergy.
It's a
I
give and
guess.
take. Right. No, and again, you're bringing up an exceptionally valid point. It really is. But again, it's a question that I want to give some more thoughts to, because it
Please,
really
that would
is
be
a
great.
phenomenal question. It really
Thank you.
is. Okay, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. The webinars typically end at 12:45. So what I do want to just end off by saying is that the summer is really a wonderful time for planning, as we all know, for the upcoming development year. I'm here. I'm available to schedule time to meet one-on-one if anybody's interested in doing that, to really strategize and to help you maximize your fundraising revenue for the upcoming year. Our next webinar is going to be taking place on Tuesday, June 20th. A little bit of a different one as well. This one's going to be with a very, very good friend of mine from college. We've known each other for many years. Eric Andron of MIS Support and Hackify, two of his companies. And we're going to be discussing using technology to enhance our development strategies and operations. Should be a little bit of an interesting conversation. We'll probably be talking a little bit about CRMs, security, how to donor security, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that should be very, very interesting. And please watch your inbox for details. Finally, I also want to mention that you're more than welcome to contact me at any time if I can help you or your organization to grow and to thrive. And you can reach me. My cell phone number is 917-751-5777. That's 917-751-5777. You can obviously also reach me at my email, which is ryan@rhstrategic.net. That's ryan@rhstrategic.net. And until next time, looking forward to hearing from you, and keep on doing the amazing work that you're doing for your organizations.